So, good evening, everybody, and good morning to those in North America who may be part of our digital series. It gives me a lot of happiness and inspiration today to welcome my dear friend Abbie Cornett into the Soil Forum. I first met Abbie in 1985 when I was a young man. I was just over 30 years old. I was selected by the Rotary International for what is called the Group Study Exchange Program. And our first stop was in Nebraska and Omaha. And I was invited to stay in the home of Abbie and her mom, Mary Cornett. And Mary Cornett, Abbie's mom, was an absolutely remarkable woman. I have very, very fond memories. And although I spent just a few days with them, she said to me, "Call me mom." And I did. And, you know, I have some very, very fond memories of my time with her. What a remarkable leader she was. And I am sure Abbie will talk more about her. And then during those few days, I would go for walks with Abbie, and she was very fond of her dogs and cats and animals. And, you know, sometimes I would go for walks and I would ask her about her interests in life. And she used to talk about making a career in public life, in international relations. And she always struck me as somebody who wanted to do something more in this world to make the world better. And so she really, even as a young teenager, she left a big impact on me. And that was my first exposure to North America. And I said, these are the kind of leaders who are there in America, the young women. I said, the future is in good hands. So thanks a lot, Abbie, for coming today and for being part of this conversation today.
Thank you so much for inviting me.
Thank you.
It is a real pleasure.
Thank you very much. So Abbie, one of the first things that I always start my conversation with is to understand from you, out of all the amazing things you have done, when were you at your happiest, best?
You know, I gave a lot of thought to that, because when you asked me that, you know, as something you might talk to me about, I really had to think about that, because at each stage of your life, you think you're at your happiest. And I would have to say, I mean, when I was a young person, I would say my happiest was when I was out hiking or, you know, doing something like that. When I was a police officer, I'd say my happiest was when I did something very good that day. When I was in politics, I would have said my happiest was when I had passed my final year in the legislature. I had the most number of priority bills that had ever been introduced in the legislature, and carried them all for quite a bit of economic development for the state. And then I realized that my happiness is probably right now. And, you know, I hope if you ask me that question again 10 years from now, I'll say my happiness is right now.
Wow. It seems like, Abbie, you are such a happy person that it's not the external context that makes you happy. It's because you source happiness from within. And so what a fine example that, you know, 35 years back, I remember you with the same energy, and here we are, 2020. And here I experience, Abbie, with the same positive enthusiasm in your life. What
You're
a
making me
remarkable
feel old.
But Abbie, at the same time, I want to ask something that you did, which when you look back and you tell your children or tell your grandchildren one day, this is what we did, which was special. Out of all the things that you did with your colleagues, with your friends, with the community, what stands out as things that you have done which gives you tremendous satisfaction of what you have achieved and what you have contributed?
I would say that it would probably be what I got done in the Nebraska legislature, particularly during the recession, when we had to go in. People tend to think that maybe the best thing you can do in life is something that is like one-on-one with a person, like giving somebody something directly. But when you have an entire state facing economic hardship and people losing their homes and not having money, that impacts everyone. And we, in the legislature, I was chair of revenue, which handled the taxes. We were able to reorganize the tax structure and cut things from the budget in that year. And it was sometimes 20, 22, 23-hour days. I slept on the floor of my office to find a way not to raise taxes and take even more money out of people's pockets. But beyond that, to build a structure in the system that allowed economic development in the state and brought business in. So Nebraska was one of the few states that came through the recession, went into the recession later and came out of it much stronger than most other states, which helps everyone in that state. And I would say that was probably one of my biggest accomplishments.
Very nice. How did that happen? How did you manage to get the support? In this kind of politics, I know that both in our country and in the United States, it's a democratic country, but it's not easy to build support for something. So how did you manage to do? And can you talk about some of the issues that were very important to you?
Well, for me, it doesn't matter if you're a Democrat or a Republican. Everyone should look at what is the end goal and what is the best thing for the population, not just for me, not just for my party, not just for my constituents, but for the whole. And you have to be able to sit down with the person across from you and discuss those issues without anger. You have to be able to take all of the rhetoric out and say, okay, we don't agree on this and we don't agree on that, but what do we agree on? And what we agreed on at that time is trying to still provide services to the population of the state of Nebraska, and to do that without raising taxes. Now, how do you do that? Everybody has to give. It's a little bit like haggling. I say, okay, we're going to do this, this, and this. And they go, no, we're going to raise taxes, or we're going to do this. And I'm like, okay, no, I'll give you this and you give me that. There's an old saying called horse trading, but you have to be willing to negotiate, and you have to be willing to give.
That's very nice. In this noisy world of politics and debates and conversations, and when all this happens, what you are talking about is not only visionary in a way, but it's very difficult for people to practice this, because we all get so attached to our own ideas, our own beliefs, and our own biases. So what has enabled you to transcend your biases for the sake of the larger good? Where does that come from in Abbie?
Respect. Mm-hmm. You might have your beliefs, and I might have my beliefs, but it's a little bit like people being able to come together and talk that are different religions. Politics aren't that different than religions. People get very entrenched in their ideas, but you have to be willing to listen. And you have to be willing to say, okay, I don't agree with you, but I respect you as a person. And then how do you move into a dialogue based on respect? Of course I get mad. I have a terrible temper. I fully admit that. And when I start to feel myself getting mad, I'm like, take a step back, because you may think things, but if you have a basic respect for somebody, you don't say them.
What a nice thing to say, because sometimes in an anger, when you say something, the words can cause an injury which remains for a long time, and we don't understand the consequences of what that means. So thank you, because really thank you for saying that. Yes.
I can honestly say, having been a police officer, I've been physically injured, and having been a politician, I've been emotionally injured, and the emotional injuries last a lot longer.
Yes.
They're the ones that keep you awake at night.
So Abbie, tell us about your career in the police force. What made you get into becoming a police officer? Can you talk about that and share the highlights of what you learned in your journey as a leader in the police force?
I joined the police department because I'm an adrenaline junkie. I love action. I love being in the middle of things. And I also was very into physical fitness at the time. And so I was in pretty good shape. I had originally been an international business major, and I still was a business major. But I decided to sign up and take the police exam kind of as a joke. And I took the written exam and I tested very well. And I got a letter saying, come to the physical. And I went to the physical and I did very well because I was marathoning back then. And then the next thing I knew, I'm like, this might be a real thing. And so then I went to the next phase and the next phase. And then all of a sudden, somewhere along the line, I became very invested in the idea. And so I went ahead and was a police officer, and I call that my fun years.
Mm-hmm. Can you talk about some of the learning that you got as a police officer, and and how did you sort of build your rapport with the community? What did you do to raise standards? Can you talk a little bit more about what actually happened?
Being a police officer is tough, particularly the first few years. There is very little building a rapport. You're in a patrol car. And you just go, and I worked from midnight at night to 8 in the morning. So you do not see people at their best. The only time somebody calls the police officer at 4 o'clock in the morning, something bad has happened. Whether it's happened to them or they've done something, you don't see people at their best. And the big thing comes back to what we talked about before. No matter how bad a person is, you still treat them with respect. And I saw a lot of times people didn't necessarily do that. They didn't treat me with respect, and other police officers didn't treat them with respect. And that is where a lot of the problem comes from, is people they seem to be able to distance themselves from the fact that the other person is a human being and has a different life experience. So the big thing is, remember that the person in front of you is just the same as you are, basically. But I was a police officer for 10 years. I ended up I moved from patrol into some work with narcotics, and then I was a firearms instructor. And I taught handguns, shotguns, and AR-15s, and then still did some patrol work. And I was injured and ended up having to retire.
Can you talk more about what that firearms instructor job is like? I mean, that must have been not only being very skilled at weapons, teaching it to others. What did you learn out of that? Yes.
Oh, discipline. Mm-hmm. Discipline about probably the most. I was the first female in the whole region that I'm from that ever made it through the shotgun instructor course. It's a very, very grueling physical course. I learned that a lot of men didn't want me there. But they couldn't get rid of me. Yes. I'm a little tenacious, but it was physically grueling. And you have to learn to reach inside of yourself no matter how physically tired you are. And to a certain extent, the physical pain, because we went through, and if anybody's ever fired a shotgun, it has a very bad recoil. We went through 2,500 rounds of 12 gauge double odd buck in a 3-day period or 4-day period.
Wow.
So even with, I'm not big. Like what I mean, I'm not muscular. I'm not a big, huge person. It was completely bruised from my shoulder all the way down. And then they also teach you combat techniques during that. So I was pretty beat up, but it teaches you discipline. And then the interesting part about that is a lot of times women are better shots than men, particularly with handguns, because women have better fine motor skills than men do. Men biologically have more gross motor skills than fine motor skills. But a lot of the women came into the police department with a mental block that I can't shoot because I'm female or I'm not good at this. And that was interesting when it came to teaching, removing some of those bias that people have about themselves, and what they can do and can't do, and getting around. Most of it's up here. If you think you can't do it, you can't do it. If you learn to believe you can do it, you can do it.
Yeah. What a nice, yes. What a nice thing to say, because
we were about to have noise. My dog was barking at the door.
Okay. Yes, you were always very fond of your dogs. I remember that. Yes.
Yes.
So, this is something I completely believe in myself, because it all first begins in your visualizing something and saying, I'm going to do it, and holding that deep in your heart. And
I agree.
And so that's such an important aspect, and I have seen that manifest in my own life, Abbie. Talk to us more about your early years and your growing up and being with your mom, and how was that experience like?
I grew up in a very different household. My family on my mother's side, I was the fourth generation only child female, and I don't know if you knew that. But my great grandmother had been born in what was called a sod house in western Nebraska, and she grew up on a ranch, driving cattle, fixing fences, because she was the only girl. And she was a very big woman. She was 6'1", but she was one of the first women accepted to the Music Institute in Chicago, and she became a pianist and taught piano. My grandmother ran a business on her own after her father died, and then my mother had started working from the time she was 7 years old in that business, because her dad died young. My father passed away when I was 9. So I had the advantage, which a lot of kids in America do not have. I grew up with my grandparents in my house. There were 4 generations of us living in the house. My great grandmother had passed away right before I met you. She died when she was almost 105 years old. But I grew up with that generational support. I had my mother, I had my grandmother, and I had my great grandmother all in the house.
Wow.
They lived in the house that you were at. So it was very good. My mother, everyone was very politically active. Everyone. My great grandmother was arrested for leafleting cars for the women's right to vote.
Wow.
For suffrage. My mother was very active in the political parties and did quite a bit of work with the Kennedy administration, and then became the city clerk of the city of Omaha. And she was pretty groundbreaking in that. When she was hired, she was the first woman of a major city to hold that position in the United States. And then when she became pregnant with me, you were supposed to resign if you were female and you became pregnant. And she was much older. She was 42 when I was born. And she told him no. She's like, I'm not going to do it. And so she worked all the way through, and then obviously had me.
Yes. But
my mother was a very strong figure. And she married late in life because she had always had her career and politics and her business. And then she was a very good mother. She taught me a lot of things, but probably, again, back to the first thing is believe in yourself. And don't ever take no for an answer.
Wow. Yes. And you know what I remember about her, she was also very caring. Like, she would make sure that my clothes were washed nicely and ironed and folded. And she would inquire about what kind of food I would like to eat. And in the evening, those days, I was also fond of my occasional drink. So we would sit down, and I think she would pick up this bourbon, and she would put a large drink for me and herself, and then we would have a hearty laugh, and it was amazing. Those few days I spent, I found her to be a very generous person, a strong person, a very clear thinker. So that was my first exposure to North America, and I said, this is a great country. What a nice, and the very first family I met was your family. And I must, yes.
I was going to say that was one thing my mother always stressed. Yeah. And it's a joke at my house. Everyone assumes when they look at me, I'd be emotional and girly girl. My bedtime stories when I was little, my mother said one thing, first of all, they can take everything from you, but they can't take your education. Always be a lifelong learner. Never stop learning. I'm taking classes right now. Never stop learning. But my bedtime story when I was little was political works. I remember my mother reading me chapters from Machiavelli's The Prince. Wow. And that was, I didn't get like, I don't even know what bedtime stories are, but I got Shakespeare, I got Machiavelli, I got Milton. And you have to teach your children to think, and you have to teach people to think.
How very nice. It reminds me of my own father, because he had done his MA in English literature, and he would always quote Shakespeare, and he would quote Keats and Milton, mm-hmm. and some amazing people. And we grew up with these stories of, my father's professor in English literature was a Nobel laureate, and so he would often tell us some amazing stuff about literature, and I think that made us much better people. And we also used, yes, go ahead.
My mother read me Dantes Inferno, and the lessons that she taught me had nothing to do per se with the Judeo-Christian idea of heaven and hell. It had to do with your interactions with community. And if anybody's ever read that, the outer circles of hell are what our criminal justice system would say are the really bad people. A lot of times it held the murderers, but the inner circle of hell was the people that destroyed trust. It was not people that committed violent acts or stole, or that was not good. But the really bad people were the destroyers of faith and trust.
That sounds like just the person I love deeply, even though I met her just for a short while. Let me ask you another thing now. In all this journey that you had, there must have been some challenges. I also know that you had some very significant health challenges. Can you tell everybody on this webinar about what kind of challenges you faced, and how did you source the energy to overcome those challenges and the resilience that you demonstrated in the process?
From the time I was little, I got sick very easily, and they didn't know why. But it got worse and worse as I got older, to the point that when I was 31, I spent almost 9 months in the hospital or home hospital care. And then I got better for a while, and I kind of wasn't planning on it per se right then, but I had my twins. I got pregnant. And after they were born, I was at my physical worst. And I ended up almost dying from a very simple virus and spending a lot of time in intensive care. And I never will forget, the doctor came in and he's like, I don't know what's going on. He goes, but if we don't figure this out, you will never live to see 40. Because I'd started rejecting my own lung tissue. So finally, long and short of it is they found an answer to it, that I had a genetic disorder, that I have to have a medication called IG, which is human immunoglobulins, a replacement, because I don't produce those. But I a lot of times people, when they get sick, they give up, and I could just never see my life not being full. And even I have a primary immune deficiency, which means I without the medication, I can get sick very easily. But before they diagnosed it, everybody's like, well, you need to stay inside. You need to do this. You need to do that. And I'm like, I don't want to. And it kind of comes down for me to what you said earlier, how you envision your life, where you want to be in the future. And that is not where I wanted to be. I hated being sick. I hated not being able to go out and do things. I hated, not being active. So it was tough.
Yeah, I would imagine so, because when everybody says that you may not even live, so what you're saying is you had this commitment to yourself that you have to lead a full life. And you were visualizing so many things need to be done. And just the power of that said, I have to overcome this. I have to fight this. I have to overcome this. Yes.
The big thing is I never saw myself as sick. And I think a lot of it has to do with how you see yourself. I never went in my mind, I can't do this because of this. My mind works, okay, how do I get around this?
Very nice. But was there ever a case, Abbie, in which you faced what is called significant failure, or things which you just didn't turn out to be, something like a really low point happens in all of our lives and careers? And was there any such situation? And if so, how did you deal with that?
I think that's interesting. My mother always said, don't judge people on their successes. Judge them on how they deal with their failures. A lot of times people, when they fail, give up. Failure should simply teach us what to do next time and how to do it better. I suppose for me, one of the biggest things that I viewed as a failure was when I got hurt on the police department. And they forced me to retire. I always joke that if I'd been a horse, they would have shot me. Because I had such a significant leg injury that they said I could never return to duty. And I saw that as a huge failure. And I didn't know, I had taken everything that I was and invested it in that job. And my husband worked for the police department. All my friends were on the police department. And I was pretty low for a little bit. How did I get through that? I found something else, but we'll move on to that. And it was a very good friend, actually. She took me to lunch, and I think you met her when you were back there. Her name was Toba.
Yes.
And I remember because we were all at the house together, and you were there, and Abid, my friend that was Muslim, was there, and Toba, who was Jewish, was there. And this was in 1985, and we were all sitting at the table, talking, eating, and everybody got along. It was a place of safety to talk. But I really she took me to lunch, and she said, she goes, you always talked about running for office one day. She goes, I put your name in to some people for this. And I was really upset with her because I still wanted to feel sorry for myself. So that's how I ended up running for office, was because she set the wheels in place, and then pretty soon the phone calls started coming. You need to do this. And then my husband encouraged me to.
Wonderful. And for the benefit of the viewers, I want everyone to know that Abbie was a two-time senator. And the reason she could not continue, because unlike India, in North America, there is a law that you cannot be a legislator, you can't be a senator for more than 2 terms of 4 years each. So that's why she had to finish that part of her career and now move to the things that she does today. But there is so much more for me to ask and to learn from Abbie. But I would now turn to all the viewers because a lot of questions have started coming. So I'm going to read the questions to you, Abby. So first, there's a question from Bhanu Prakash. He says, do you find corrupted politicians in America? If so, how do you handle the corrupt politicians? How do you confront them professionally, Abby?
There's corruption everywhere. The United States isn't different than any place else. The one thing I can honestly say is on the police department, 98% of the people I worked with, I may not have liked them, but they were honest. Does that make sense? In politics, there are corrupt politicians, but they are the minority. I've been out of politics now for, what year is this? Probably 8 years. And there were people that did things that I questioned ethically. But again, they were the minority. For me, I tend to be confrontational. And there was one person, and that's just who I am. It probably what drove me to the police department. But I will engage you verbally. And that's who I am. But, you know, I remember one particular person was voting on something that I felt they had a financial tie to. And I called them out on it. But as long as you claim with the Accountability and Disclosure Department that you are doing these things, then Nebraska allows it. But the big thing is when you see something you don't agree with or that you don't think is honest, you have to confront that head on. You don't go, okay, I'm going to put my blinders on and pretend I don't see it. You have to see it and you have to react. But that doesn't mean you have to be mean. You have to do what you have to do. There's a difference between doing business and being mean.
Reminds me, I wanted to ask you about the sage of Omaha, Warren Buffett. Do you know him?
I have met him, yes. I worked on a bill that he and it was on the stadium in Papillion. So yes, I have worked with him.
And how did you experience this man? Because he's become quite a legend. And in India, many people talk about him and the Giving Pledge along with Bill Gates and others.
I found him very pleasant. He had actually known my mother. They went to the same high school together. So I did not, he's a very pleasant man. He dresses very simply. He speaks very simply. He's very intelligent.
Yeah. Wonderful. So yeah, that's
and
what
he lives a simple life. With all of that money, he lives a simple life.
That's exactly what I found. What an incredible part of him, almost Gandhi-like. And you know, tomorrow is Gandhi's birthday in India, and I was so happy that we are interviewing you today on the eve of Gandhi's birthday. It's also the birthday of one of our greatest leaders, former Prime Minister Lal Bahadur Shastri, who was also just as simple as Gandhi and a great community builder. So nice to have you. One of my students, Sneha, female student, Sneha Yadav is asking, what is the one advice you want to give when sometimes we feel we are not good enough due to the conditioning of the mind and or anxiety?
You know, that is something, I was very fortunate. I grew up in a household, like I said, of all women that were very strong women. And no one ever said you can't do this because you're a girl, or you can't do this because of your place in the society or your economic status. I was always taught you can do it. But I've seen a lot of women that have anxiety because they've been told their whole lives they have to live a certain way. And men have it too. we have very defined roles. You're supposed to do this. If, you know, you're supposed to do that. You're not supposed to do this. You're not supposed to do that. The belief has to come from inside of you. You have to, before you can tell anyone else, I can do this, you have to believe you can do it. So when you're facing that anxiety, you need to do self-affirmation. Instead of saying, you can't do this, you have to say, you know what? I'm smart enough. I'm strong enough. They can't tell me I can't do this. My mother always, it was very funny. Even to the day she died, she had incredibly low blood pressure. And she had a very, 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 very stressful job. And one day I'm like, Mom, why don't you ever have high blood? Why does your blood pressure go up? And she goes, because whenever I feel myself getting stressed or anxious, I pass it on to the person that's making me anxious. So
yes.
Basically, my takeaway from that is if someone is making you feel like you're less or not as worthy, it's time for you to make them feel that way.
Okay. What a nice thing to say. What a practical thing to say. And Monica Tata from Portugal, she's been attending our conversations and she's from Portugal. She says, what an amazing personal journey, Abbie. And after listening, I do believe that women have the examples to whom they can identify inspirational behaviors, they will pursue those goals. So she just wants to say this to you. And Anurag Mathur is appreciating your shooting skills and as to the fact that women can be better than men in that. And Rami Mukhija, the former board member of one of India's the most respected and largest global company, Larsen and Toubro, he talks about, he also says, I hated being inactive. Great feeling to overcoming the problems. Yes. And so, okay. Bhanu Prakash is appreciating what you're saying. And then he's saying, what's going to be the status of elections? So what is your reading of current elections in your country? Is there any opinion you have about that?
Well, I have lots of opinions. I really don't know what's going to happen with the election. And I'm very concerned whatever way or whoever wins, and I'm not going to necessarily say endorse either side here, but whoever wins, you're going to have 50% of the country that's mad. And the anger or that was there when Obama got elected was minor compared to where we are now. And over the course of the last 5 or 6 years, the basic respect human beings have for one another has decreased. And part of it is social media. Right now, people can get on Facebook or Twitter or Instagram or whatever, and you might not know someone personally, but because you don't know them and they're not in front of you and they're not on the telephone and you don't have to sit down and write a letter, you can attack them. And that's led to people losing the boundaries that used to be there. If you scroll through, you see people insulting one another like they would never have done in the past. And I think that is going to lead to problems. And I think this political cycle is going to be a mess. I really do. I'm very concerned for what's going to happen after the election.
Before we started having this conversation, you were talking about how you have to be a statesperson and not just, you have to really lift yourself beyond differences to work together to serve the well-being of all. And, that is really wonderful statement. My cousin, Beena Singh, she was India's first mechanical engineer from IIT, and she also was in public life, and she also did some wonderful, amazing work in the social sector. She's asking, Abbie, how How are you engaged in public life today? Talk more about your contribution in what you are doing these days in the community. Yes.
After I was term limited, one of the companies that I had worked with a nonprofit, they distribute biologics for patients with rare diseases, asked me to come on as their patient advocate and to work with the patients and the physicians and all the stakeholders to provide services to patients with rare diseases. So I am still directly involved with helping people. Now it's, instead of being on the broad policy point of view, now I'm working with people individually and one-on-one. In regards to the policy side, I still write, and I write quite a few articles every year, and then engage in blogs and commentary, and attend patient advocacy meetings and meet with stakeholders. So my emphasis has switched from more the policy side to the actual individual side.
Wonderful. Abbie, Bridge Chandiramani, who's adjunct faculty in our school and is also the former head of HR of Xerox, he asked a question. He said, what are your suggestions for reducing the polarization that is happening across the globe? The European Commission today has taken United Kingdom, England to court for breaking a law. And then in India, people are concerned that are we thinking too much in one way and are we getting polarized in this country? And they see what's happening in the streets in North America. So this is happening worldwide. There are some people, very strong leaders who are emerging, who are wanting to optimize local interest of their own sort of people. And they are not necessarily committed to the larger well-being. So what are your suggestions on how we can reduce this polarization?
That's a very tough one.
Yes.
If you have studied history at all, a lot of these social conditions are very similar to what they were prior to World War II. The rise of the instead of looking globally, looking more isolationist policies, the extreme right, the extreme left, it is going to be very difficult. And I mean, I wish I had an answer to that. I personally don't see how it is happening. I mean, from inside of me, I can look and see it happening globally. The big thing I think is you have to be able to stop dehumanizing the other side. I see it from a lot of my friends every day on both sides, because I have friends that are Republican, I have friends that are police officers, I have friends that are Democrats that are very liberal, I have friends that are libertarian, but everybody becomes so entrenched in their own ideology that they stop listening. And again, it comes back to the basics. All human beings have certain needs. And you've got Maslow's hierarchy, basic needs, food, shelter, and then moving up that hierarchy, what can people agree on? Instead of like sitting down and immediately saying, what don't we agree on and let's fight, let's sit down and figure out what we can agree on to start with. And I think that if people did that, they'd find out they have a lot more they can agree on than they disagree on.
That's a very wise thing to say, Abbie. Yes, thank you for saying that. I personally feel that learning to have dialogue across differences is probably the biggest skill that we need to learn ourselves, and we need to teach in all our schools on how to have dialogue across differences. So thank you for bringing that out. Ravi Medigesi is saying that building consensus is the biggest challenge in any democracy. And it's similar to what we are just discussing. So are there any tips you want to give to politicians on how they could start working on consensus? You partly answered that already. Do you want to build upon that?
Building consensus is difficult. What you have to do, though, is understand that a politician's first primary goal is to get reelected. And I know that sounds self-serving, but just look, every politician's goal is that next election. How can you help them fulfill the needs of their constituency? Because in Nebraska, it's where I'm from originally, it's very polarized in that you have the metropolitan area, which is Omaha and Lincoln, and then you have the entire rest of the state, which is farmers and ranchers. And they don't really have very much in common. So when you're looking at building consensus, you have to look at each of those people and where they're from and what their constituency is, and determine what their basic needs are, because they have to go home and face their people every day at the coffee shop and the grocery store, and they can't go home having voted for something that makes everybody mad. So what are their needs? Because again, it comes back down to everybody gets entrenched in what they want. What are the people that you're working with's basic needs? And how do you meet those in regards to legislation, or when you craft a bill, or when you craft something? Because you can't just say, okay, well, I have to make the people in my district happy. It's about making the overall population happy. And that's a process of give and take.
Very nice. Roland Sullivan, who is an organizational development consultant at a global level and lives in North America, he asks a question. He says, Abbie, what do you believe about climate change, and what do we need to do about this climate change?
Well, I'm telling you right now, climate change is happening. My husband and I talk about this all the time. Whatever the reason for climate change. I live in Los Angeles County now, outside of LA. 3 weeks ago, it was 121 degrees, hottest temperature recorded here. Now, it was hotter in the desert. We're not in the desert. We're in the mountains. We're in the base of the mountain. And the Bobcat fire started. That is our third fire, huge fire in 3 years. This one became the second, I believe, largest in California. And it was bad. The smoke was bad enough we had to evacuate. The fire got within a few 100,000 yards of our house. Climate change is happening. I was reading an article that basically had the coldest recorded temperature ever in North America. I believe it was in Greenland. It was 96 below this year, 96 below zero Fahrenheit, not Celsius. That is something that all countries need to work on their emissions, and not just carbon. We need the water bottles. Everybody needs to get rid of their stupid plastic water bottles. We're filling landfills up with plastic. All societies became societies of convenience. I remember when we were kids, we'd go to the grocery store and stuff was wrapped in paper. Everybody needs to make a personal commitment to living a cleaner lifestyle. But right now, with politics the way they are, it's going to be very, very difficult to come to an agreement on worldwide consensus for climate change.
Sanjeev Tripathi, who is the head of human resources of a well-known company called Osram in India, he's saying the US is the oldest democracy and India is the biggest democracy. What would you advise to the youth of India for asking the right questions to politicians so as to safeguard us from the polarization politics? What would you encourage our youth in this country to take responsibility for, and how should they be better citizens, and how should they hold politicians accountable?
The first thing I would say for students or young people is be educated. I have 3 children, and my teenagers, they're 19, my twins, and then my youngest is 14, have grown up in a very political household. My daughter one daughter is interning with the congressman's office out here now. But a lot of times young people have ideas and thoughts and they want to argue about it, and they become because it's part of youth, they become very, very vocal, they're very excited, but they don't really have a basis of education for that view. And this goes back to my mother. My mom always said, I don't care what your opinion is. I want you to be able to tell me why you believe that and back it up with fact. The biggest thing I can tell young people is research, learn, find out what your opinion actually means. When a lot of the girls' friends here now are saying, "Oh, we want socialism," and they don't even know what socialism is. I'm like, okay, what does that mean? Do you want a social democracy? Do you want pure socialism? Do you want communism? And they don't even know what that means. Before you go talk to your politicians, before you try and make a change, you need to figure out exactly what you're saying, and be educated. I think the best thing that we can do for our young population is give them the best, well-rounded education possible.
Thank you. Here is a wonderful question from Arshdeep. Arshdeep is asking, could you describe the most difficult negotiation undertaken by you and the way you went about it, the toughest negotiation?
Okay, we'll leave names out of it.
Yes.
But yes, there was this governor, and then there was this US senator who were different political parties. And there was a tax commissioner, and the tax commissioner had looked at the existing tax law and had decided that we had to tax all of the new buildings and construction on a very large military base and a veterans hospital because of the way the tax code was written. And it was going to kill the projects. But the base is one of the largest economic drivers in the state of Nebraska. So both sides didn't want it taxed, but they wouldn't even meet with one another. So the governor, who was retired military, obviously didn't want it taxed, but he didn't want to give it a tax break because the project was the senator's idea. So the tax commissioner and I sat down and told them how we could do it with a fairly simple change. And I was running back and forth from the governor's office to the steps of the Capitol, because the senator's representative would not set foot inside the governor's office, and the governor wouldn't talk to the. So I was going back and forth between the two. And finally, because one of them was just entrenched, I'm not going to do it. And I'm like, okay, and I'm sorry, this is actually funny, and I shouldn't be telling you this, but I set my stuff down, and I looked at him, I'm like, sir, the monkeys are going to start throwing poo at you. I said, there is no way that you can take this position and survive. There's just no way, because you've done this, and this in your life, and it's exactly diametrically opposed to not agreeing to this. And I said, and they're going to use it against you. And all of a sudden, you could just see the light bulbs go on. And we were able to get the exemption through. So, but it was actually very, very That was one of them. There was one other, but that was, I literally just sat myself down and I had my aides there and the tax commissioner was there and I looked at this person and I said, sir, the monkeys are going to start throwing poo. You're not going to win this one.
What a nice story. Thank you, Abbie, for sharing that. Deen Dayalan, who runs a consulting company which works with the blue-collared staff, and he has 100 consultants and trainers who work with the factory, shop floor, blue-collared people. He says, what's your take on conscious capitalism, particularly because the inequality has increased so much that 99% of the wealth is owned by just 1% of people? And so what's your take on this, and what can we do as conscious capitalists to sort of work on this problem?
It's a real problem. Like I said, I live in LA County, and it is incredibly expensive to live here. Incredibly expensive where I'm at. And I know people that are living 5 and 6 people to a 1-bedroom apartment. You would not know that Los Angeles County in places is inside the United States if you went and looked. And there are more have-nots than there are haves. But at the same time, you go to certain areas and everyone is driving Mercedes and Ferraris and cars that cost $200,000-$300,000. But there are people that are living one of my daughter's friends sleeps in a closet.
Oh my God.
Because they have 4 kids to 1 little bedroom in a 2-bedroom house with 7 or 8 people living in it. So she has a walk-in, like a little closet inside, and it's long and narrow, and that's where her mattress is inside the closet. We have to find a way to redistribute economic resources. And falling back on my tax background, the most equitable way to do that is taxes. We need to look at the tax structure, and people need to be paying taxes based on what they can afford to pay.
Thank you. Abbie, my friend Rami Mukhija says that, he has a suggestion that you should move to the United States national level Senate. The country would be richer because of that. Any plans for getting back to public office in the future?
It would be pretty hard in California. In the area that I'm in, it's very, very liberal, and I'm not very, very far conservative, but I'm middle of the road, and it's very hard anymore. And that's another point, is we became so polarized in our political offices that the majority of the people are being left behind. The majority of the people fall in the middle. Not the majority isn't far right or far left, but we don't have anyone to represent us anymore. And I think the middle are the people that are being left behind.
Abbie, what a delight to have you here. There are so many more comments and questions. I haven't had the time. I apologize to those who wanted to ask more. We are running out of time. So let me attempt to summarize what I learned from you today, Abbie. The first, I was so inspired to hear the stories of your great-grandmother, grandmother, your mother, and the lineage which you come from. Strong women doing the right thing to serve the well-being of all. Having the courage to believe in what is right. And you told us it's not just a dogma or a belief. It is for you to be educated. And you defined education as understanding the context, understanding why do you believe in something, and truly asking questions, truly asking questions. And you said that this liberal arts kind of education of literature and Shakespeare and Milton, it invokes that part of your thinking process that gives you a holistic vision. And that is such an important part for you to be able to understand there are shades of gray. And what you said then, in life, you could agree to disagree with somebody, but you will always respect that person. You will not put down that person merely because her views are different from yours. And so you really need to listen. I couldn't agree with you more. I think most of the problems in our planet is because we do not take the time to listen. We do not give each other the gift of attention. And so that is such a wonderful thing to say. And then you said, there will be occasions when there will be problems. It's very difficult to get everybody to agree on something. But as long as you give the process of getting everybody to have a voice to express, and when people say, I have expressed, and now I have to support the outcome, even though I may have disagreed with it. And that is such an important principle to remember. The stories of your being in the police force say you have to believe it inside you that I can do it. Just because somebody says this cannot be done, I'm not going to believe the lies. I have unlimited potential and I have to access that. The first person I have to love is myself. I have to be first compassionate to myself. So when I'm compassionate to myself, when I love myself, then I can rise in my own eyes and then I can be committed and focused. What a nice thing to say. You reminded us that we are facing complex problems today. Climate change, inequality, all this, we have to all strive individually to become better versions of ourselves. There is no point in talking about the global climate change if we are not willing to give up our plastic bottles and if we still continue to waste water and energy. So, and finally, you reminded us and reminded the young people, if you really want to hold politicians accountable and want to become better citizens, truly get yourself a proper education, earn the right to ask questions by first doing the right thing yourself, comprehending what the whole world is about and the context is about, and that will make all of us become better versions of ourselves. So thanks a lot, Abbie. I can't thank you enough. What a gift to receive to have you. And I'm sure this video is going to be watched by many more people after this is over. So thank you.
And thank you so much for inviting me. And by the way, happy birthday.
Yes, thank you very much. That was on 22nd September. So thank you. Thank you very much. And happy birthday to Gandhi tomorrow and to Shastriji tomorrow. Thank you very much. And all our love from India to all of you and to your wonderful 3 daughters and your husband. And I hope to see you in the near future in California.
And I would love to visit you. Have a wonderful time.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Bye-bye.